and thank you very much, Fanny, for that presentation. And I was a bit scared when you say these brilliant minds, and I'm not so sure about that, but certainly passionate, that's for sure. And Eduardo, I think I'm going to grant you a little bit of your wish, because precisely I'm going to talk today about public spaces in Latin America in general, and to do that I'm going to touch a little bit of the history, the past, and a little bit of the present that is bringing us to the challenge that I think we have today, and then I would like to move a little bit of where do I see the future of places. So, let's go right to the beginning, and because I'm Mexican, I have to show you the pyramids, of course, and usually we go on tourism and we love to see them, and we don't know too much or too well what are we looking at. But today, all the prehistoric patterns demonstrate, according to recent anthropological studies, that Mesoamerican planning took place around a civic ceremonial place. The Mesoamerican planning was originated by a strategic analysis of the geographical and topographical conditions of agriculture and security purposes that allowed an advantage over other communities. So, places like Teotihuacan, Monte Alban, La Venta, Tikal in Guatemala, all those, in fact, were communicated, understood each other, learned from each other, and rebuild an urban conception that allows flexible development. And studies confirm now that the urban center of main public places was located in the best possible site, considering the symbolic elements defined by the yearly calendar and the movements of the sun, the moon, the stars. So there was a cosmovision tied to nature and its cycles. So there were axes, composed to define the city planning and the main space in a symbolic representation of the universe. So these strategic ideas were communicated and replicated among all these different cultures in very different regions, bringing status and power to the best public spaces. Public spaces really counted, and it was only the temples there or the pyramids that were highlighted, but the thing was really the power, the center, the politics was taken in the space itself. Then the Spaniards came with the New World, established the influence of the European medieval cities built around the 12th, the 16th centuries on both sides of the Pyrenees. We learned about the Bastides, and we learned a lot about, and that was really the most stronger influence, the Roman called castrum cities that were planned to grow. That was the main thing. And so that's why the reticular trace came about. And there was a generous disposition of public space and its uses. So this was the main influence of cities like Bogota, like Caracas, like Havana, like Buenos Aires, like Mexico City. You made it, most of Latin American cities were influenced this way. Funny enough and strange enough, cities started, in fact, and later on, the King of Spain, in the end of the 16th century, signed what it was called the Ordinance or Decree of the Laws of Indies, that established with great detail locations, designs, and plans for every town and city in New Spain. And the main thing that started the whole thing was the center plaza, or the main square, and 4 main roads joining the center with the entrance of the town. The location of the main architectural elements, the main church, the market, the houses, were defined by rank, by power, but always taking first advantage of public spaces, That was the real concern, and Eduardo was mentioning to me yesterday morning. Funny, strange enough, it was a public space that was delivered. The private space came as a consequence, not the other way around. That was the real thing. And strange enough as well, it was the Justice Department in charge of building the city. It was a matter of justice, and it was the naval engineers that built the cities. So it was really a matter of justice of how cities were built, planned, and distributed, not technical aspects. The technical aspects were left to the technical people, but it was beyond that. In fact, the whole 16th century saw these laws and regulations, and they gave way to the city model and the city life that characterized the Spanish urban development for several centuries. In fact, as you can see, and this is just a little example of what Mexico City was in the 19th century, influenced the growth of the cities until the early 20th century, when the rural-urban migration gave way to the urban area in the region. And that's when we started to see some of what are our challenges today. And I guess it all started with what we call the modern times. And certainly all Latin Americans, me included, we all went to study abroad, and we needed to learn from the Europeans and the Americans and what was going on. It was the new times. And what did we learn? First of all, we had already a big problem in the 40s and the 50s, which was called rapid urbanization. There was a whole process in Latin America that took place. The region went from 40% of the population living in cities at the beginning of the 40s to 70% 40 years later, to a demographic growth and a high rate of migration from rural to the urban areas. Something that is happening right now in Africa and Asia. Latin America experienced it decades ago. As I said, started on the 40s. 20% of space, of urban space in Latin America was marked by two tendencies. On the one hand, the influence of the universal acceptance of the functionalism architecture. Block patterns or grids were dramatically changed into the free-flowing spatial structure advocated by functionalist theorists. Planning of city was defined by zoning along a main highway and specific land uses independently developed. I love this figure because it shows the grid pattern of Buenos Aires, of New York, and Paris, and then you see what Corbusier came out with. For years and years, I tortured myself thinking, why did he do it so wrong? What happened to this guy? And funny thing is, he didn't plan any wrong. I think the main problem that still happens today at architectural schools is that architects assume the way people are going to live. They don't ask. And we keep doing the same problem. The problem, of course, is people like Le Corbusier influence generations and generations and still is influencing them. And we need to stop that. We need to ask people how they want to live. Look at the consequences. On the other hand, there was the rural-urban migration. Le Corbusier didn't have anything to do with this, of course. Rural migrants and African people, Asian people, please take note. Migrants were attracted to the main cities. At that time, in the 40s, we were all talking about industrialization. That was taking place, but industrialization in Latin America did not generate enough employment for everyone arriving into the city. So the planning and the housing policy for the time, and there was a policy, it was called laissez-faire. Let them do their own housing. We cannot support everybody. We don't have the budget. Just let them go. Whatever they want to start, whatever they want to do. So that gave way to shanty towns, squatter settlements, favelas, whatever you want to call them. The pattern of urban segregation and rapid urbanization was established, and most of the main cities of Latin America began to grow outside of the administrative limits. We used to have a saying in Mexico. We said everybody used to be born, raised, carry on, have children, and then move to Mexico City. That was the pattern. That was the real thing. We only had a few metropolitan areas, and everybody was moving into them. Today, it's a different pattern. People are moving into more secondary cities, but that was the situation at the time. So the peripheries were the place where poor communities moved to solve their shelter problems without sufficient provision of infrastructure nor services. Housing institutions were never intended to cover the growing demand for housing, the low-income population, particularly in peripheries of the cities, where migrants were rapidly establishing on their own. There was no clear policy in relation to land, and some of this is still happening today. So both tendencies helped to destroy the urban grid that was so well established by the Spaniards, and there was no policy in any case related to the creation of public spaces. Few streets, only main roads, no parks, no plazas. Urbanization was taking form in a very basic way, changing the pattern of most cities that still prevail today. So instead of really doing the public realm, people are more concerned today on the private sector. And it's mainly because a lot of the city measures, a lot of people in government are not doing the job really procuring for the poor or procuring for the citizens. So they leave things to the private sector to do them the way they can, or, as we were talking yesterday with the private sector, sometimes private sector really want to do well, and you have all these norms and regulations that are not allowing them to do the best they can do. So there's always a conflicted situation going on, which at the end is the city that is really suffering from all these problems. Only those settlements that laid out in a block pattern by squatters or developers prior to the occupation of the site in the late 60s and 70s were established as proper suburban neighborhoods. So reservations of right-of-way for street grids at the block level were still or are essential. Like in this is just one of many, many examples of squatter settlements that really start properly creating a grid beforehand, and it really helped them to develop eventually into a proper neighborhood. So by the turn of the 21st century, most gross domestic product of the housing sectors were growing above the economic growth in general and in most Latin American countries. So by 2009, what Eduardo mentioned, that some cities were growing 2 times or 3 times more the population. In fact, in some cities, for example, like in Mexico, they're growing 4, 5, 6, even 7 times more than the population growth. That is really a challenge that we have today, because we don't even know if these housing projects have links to the city. Do they belong to the city? Do they belong to a rural area? Where they are? Do they need transportation? Are they going to build a road? That's a serious challenge today, because nobody really knows what the answer is going to be. So like many cities, like this case in Toluca, this is a city very near Mexico City, and as you can see, it has grown, I think, 4 or 5 times more, the population growth. So as you can see, as a result, the cities of the region continue building new residential complexes, commercial centers, industrial areas, informal neighborhoods, intensifying land degradation, desertification. The whole process of the city has been fragmented. Cities find it gradually harder to deal with ever-increasing urban populations and are not sustainable over the long term, owing to overwhelming negative externalities such as congestion, infrastructure issues, pollution, social disaggregation. Megacities, intermediate cities, other new settlements concentrate the highest percentage of population, particularly poorest population in Latin America, counts with some of the most unequal cities in the world. Sometimes we say that in Latin America it's not so much the problem of poverty, but inequality that has to be solved. So dual cities, divided, fragmented, segregated, especially economically and socially, challenging the city model that is generating today. In fact, it's channeling all the models that we have been trying to copy from the developed countries. They don't work, they will not work, and we need to find our own solutions. So another challenge, and I think it's important before I move into a little bit of recommendations, if I still have time, is that Latin America is changing the demographic transition. This is changing the whole profile. Some societies still benefit from the demographic bonus, while others are starting their process toward aging. So we need to learn from the Chinese now. Population changes and urbanization are 2 global trends that together comprise major forces shaping the 21st century. Our window of opportunity is going to end in 2020. All of a sudden, populations are going to decline, and we really need to think now about what we're going to do with aging and old people like myself. So security and violence are other 2 elements that emerge as one of the main priorities in Latin America today. They generate high costs to the citizens, their communities, and their institutions. They have a negative impact in the economy and in the quality of life, and this is a particular felt at the city level. So after saying all these challenges that we're still trying to deal with, I would like to leave with something that I would like everybody to think about. I'm just going to mention a few recommendations, but I think that if we really want to succeed in pushing the agenda of places in the world, each and every one of you have to start right now creating its own recommendations the way you see them for your own city, for your own government, for your own diplomat that is going to lobbying at Habitat 3 at the United Nations, because that will take a long time. I'm going to leave, in fact, and I would like to suggest something to do within these 3 days. I'm just going to mention here a few of the recommendations that I would like to see happening in my country or at the UN. I'm going to leave them. In fact, I have a few copies. I know that somebody's going to take notes about this whole conference. I would like to give them to you, but I would like to ask each and every one of you, after 3 days, start writing what would you like to see change in terms of place within your city or your country, so we can start writing up recommendations all together as part of this conference. And the second thing is, try to find out who is going to lobby, either for you or yourselves, or the ministry of whoever. Could be the education ministry, could be the foreign relations ministry. Who gives the signal to the diplomat that will represent your country at the UN, because we need to work together right now. The first preparatory process, as Thomas mentioned, is going to happen in a few weeks in New York. Do you know if any of your diplomats already have an agenda for spaces, for places, for public realm? If not, find out, because we really need to put them to work if we want things to happen. This, as Peter well said, is not just another conference. We really want to see, and I think this is beginning to take shape as a movement. So let's keep moving, let's keep working, and this is the starting point. Let's really change the world. Thank you very much.